What's up, guys? It's Dr. Tim Jackson with another episode of the Boss Body Podcast. Cell membrane health, mitochondrial membrane health. We talk about it quite a bit. So I brought on a subject matter expert in all things cell membrane health and mitochondrial health.
While I make every effort to broadcast correct information, I'm also still learning. I will double check all my facts, but realize that healthcare is a constantly changing science and art. One doctor or healthcare provider may have a different way of doing things from another. I welcome any comments, suggestions, or correction of errors. I take no money from supplement or device companies. By listening to this podcast or reading this blog, you agree not to use this podcast or blog as medical advice or to treat any medical condition in either yourself or others, including but not limited to patients that you are treating. Consult your healthcare provider for any medical issues that you may be having. This entire disclaimer also applies to any guests or contributors to the podcast or the website. Under no circumstances shall any guests or contributors to the podcast or blog or any employees, associates, or affiliates of the Boss Body podcast be responsible for damages arising from use of the podcast or the blog. This blog or podcast should not be used in any legal capacity whatsoever, including but not limited to establishing the standard of care in a legal sense or as a basis for expert witness testimony. No guarantee is given regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on the podcast or the blog.
Welcome to the show, Justine.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me, Tim.
So, how long have you been in the nutrition space?
Oh gosh, for over 13 years now, just over 13 years, and more in the mitochondrial medicine, cell membrane medicine space for about the last 7 or 8, I would say.
And you're one of the primary educator for Patricia Kane's Body Bio, correct?
Well, I do clinical education for Body Bio for their practitioners, and I learned a ton from her. Yes, I actually took all of her lipid trainings way back, starting in about 2014. And she was a major mentor of mine for years. So I learned an enormous amount from her.
Awesome. Yeah. The clinics I've worked in, I worked in a physical clinic. We did the Patricia Kane lipid exchange protocol, through IV therapy. I've used it successfully orally with kids. I have her book somewhere around here, a detox book. But you also, you're big into circadian health. Most of your videos I see on Instagram, you're walking around barefoot outside, getting sunlight with your kiddos. I think your kiddos were in the video, if I remember correctly. Which you won't be able to do that for much longer, because it's going to be snowing in Calgary, right?
It's actually already snowed. It was snowing this morning when I was outside watching the sunrise, which was non-existent today because it's pretty cloudy and gloomy out there today. But yes, even despite the poor weather in Calgary, I still do my very best to get outside as much as I can. Got my little moccasin shoes and I'm really diligent to make sure that I'm connecting to the earth and connecting my naked eyes to the sun as often as I can.
Yeah. So do you follow Jack Cruz's work?
I do. Yeah, I've been a member of Jack Cruz, his forum for a long time. I actually met him in 2014 at the Bulletproof conference in Pasadena. So I've known about his work for a very long time.
I didn't know if you saw my name in the forums, because that's where I sort of got my start, so to speak. There's a boot camp, Heal Your Hormones boot camp. I'm the guy that created the Heal Your Hormones boot camp for his community, back in like 2013, 2014.
Oh, wow. Wow. Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
haven't.
If you search my name on the website, and there's a few blog posts talking about methylation and epigenetics. So it's cool that you're combining different areas, because I think a lot of times people become really dogmatic, saying, oh, it's only this thing and that's it, and it's all you pay attention to. It's only mold, it's only metals, it's only gut dysbiosis. It's all of it, right? Like, you've got to pay attention to all of it. So cell membranes, let's talk about that, because I deal with a lot of clients and patients with mycotoxicosis, a buildup, high allostatic load of systemic mycotoxins. And, we can use binders, they're needed, but we also got to rehabilitate the cell membrane. So talk about the best ways to rehabilitate the cell membranes.
So that's a loaded question. I guess I'll start from a structure and function standpoint. So when we think about the impact that mycotoxins have on the cell membrane and the outer cell membrane and also the membranes of the organelles within the cell, mycotoxins are directly damaging the membrane. And so I use this analogy a lot. I need to come up with another one. But if we think about the human body, like we think about our bank account, we have a biochemical bank account. So the more toxins that we're exposed to, so just like you said, we have a lot of reductionist thinking in the whole field of both allopathic and integrative medicine, where we look at one thing as the sole factor in a disease process. And Dr. Robert Navio's work really beautifully displays why this is not the case. And it's really an accumulation of assaults that exceed the cell's ability to maintain homeostasis. And when we exceed our ability to maintain homeostasis, the cell then enters, or the mitochondria enters, what has been termed the cell danger response. And when it enters the cell danger response, there's a lot of metabolic shifts that occur. And the goal then is to make sure that we can restore the healing cycle and get back to the health cycle. So when we have damage to the membranes, if we focus on mycotoxins, and our biochemical bank account is depleted, or we're bankrupt, and we no longer have the materials that we need to go in and repair damage to those membranes, then those membranes are going to remain damaged, and then eventually the cell is going to die. So by taking exogenous phospholipids like the body biophospholipid complex, and supporting our body with essential fatty acids like the body biobalance oil, we're giving our body the exact materials that it needs to go in and restore damaged parts of the membrane and replace those damaged parts with functional phospholipids. And so that's the first place that we want to start. And then, as you're very well versed in the whole quantum world and understanding the role that water in the cell plays, and really acts like a battery, the molecule of phosphatidylcholine specifically, so every one of our 37 trillion cells has these two biological membranes. And the hydrophilic or water-loving head of the phosphatidylcholine molecule is interacting with that exclusion zone water. And so that exclusion zone water is supporting the membrane's electrical charge. So we also need to make sure that we are doing all the things to support the mitochondria's ability to make exclusion zone water. And then we're also needing to do all the things that are helping to support the expansion of that exclusion zone water to support the beautiful structure of that water inside our cells.
How do EMFs affect exclusion zone water?
I teach a course on mitochondrial restoration, and I just talked about this last night. There's many mechanisms as to which these non-native EMFs damage our cellular health as a whole. But the EMFs have been shown to actually break the hydrogen bonding in the exclusion zone water, but they also, Tim, cause calcium to influx into the cell, which is going to trigger the MDMA receptor, which is going to trigger glutamate, which triggers inflammation. We also
Peroxynitrite.
The non-native EMFs also are going to interfere with the membrane potential. And if you're familiar with Dr. Nick Lane's work, we have an electrical charge in that membrane that is stronger than a bolt of lightning. And so those non-native EMFs can really impact that electrical charge of the membrane, which is going to impact mitochondrial functioning, its ability to transfer those electrons through those protein complexes and to make water. All of the many roles that the mitochondria is responsible for, they really impact all of them, damage our mitochondrial DNA. They're a huge assault. I often go so far to say that I think that's our biggest assault to human health, are non-native EMFs today.
There's an app, I don't know the name of it off the top of my head. I think an engineer developed it, but it converts EMF waves into sound waves. So, for people who don't understand how profound it is, you can turn the app on and it's like, sounds like you're getting hit with a machine gun. I just didn't know if you knew of the app off the top of your head.
I'm not familiar.
Yeah, I need to look into it because I think it's a little more profound if people hear it, because obviously you can't see EMFs, and a lot of times people don't take it seriously. But several colleagues and I, we've done little experiments where we'll have the same person eat a food, like let's say a banana, in a low EMF environment. We'll measure their blood sugar, and we'll do it, repeat the experiment in a high EMF environment at the same time of day, like 2 to 3 days later, and blood glucose is much higher. And
Yeah, have
so,
I don't know if you've ever had a building biologist come out to your home to test non-native EMFs in your home, but they do have the building biologist that we use. He shows us, the different wavelengths that are coming out, the electrical current, the radio frequencies, and his machine does make a sound, so you can actually
okay,
you can hear it. But yes,
okay,
visible to the eye. So we have a huge broad range of the electromagnetic spectrum is massive, and the amount of visible light that we can actually see is less than 1%. It's actually 0.035% of the entire electromagnetic spectrum. So like you understand, when you understand that we are regulated by light, and there's just such a small percentage of this light that we can actually see, it's it's obvious that these non-native EMFs would be impacting our biology so significantly. But yeah, it's a little bit harder for a lot of people to wrap their heads around.
yeah. And so we were talking a minute ago about you work with Bruce Hoffman, a doctor in Calgary, right?
Yeah.
And I've been following him for a couple of months, few months on Instagram. I haven't, emailed or anything with him personally yet, but I'd like to try and get him on the show. Tell us a little bit about your work with him and what you guys focus on.
Yeah, so Dr. Bruce Hoffman's work, he focuses on whole body healing through 7 levels, and so he's the definition, the epitome of whole body healing. I have really yet to come across another functional medicine doctor or integrative medical doctor that's doing work like he's doing. And one of the areas that he focuses on is membrane restoration. And so that's really why I got into the whole field of phospholipids and fatty acids, is because I was able to see through my work with him that these phospholipids and fatty acids had such an enormous potential to restore mitochondrial function. Now, of course, he's doing many things to help to support restoring mitochondrial dysfunction in individuals who are ill, but the lipids played such a significant role. And so that was my first introduction to phospholipids, and actually how I got connected with Dr. Kane as well. But his work is extensive. I strongly encourage anyone to look into his work if they're really interested in understanding whole body healing, because nobody does it better than he does.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. And so you've got some cool blue blockers on. What brand is that, by the way, if you don't mind telling us?
So these are EMR Tech.
Okay. That's the
Yeah.
light panel I have in the other room, three-quarter light panel. I think you and I messaged about it, and I had already bought the red near infrared light, and then I was like, oh, what's the best sun lamp? Because I figured, hey, who's gonna know better than a Canadian the best sun lamp, right? Because I'm guessing you gotta have sun lamp if you're in Canada, right?
I only got a light for the winter last year. Last year at around December, I believe, I got my first UVA and UVB lamp, and it played such a significant role in helping me to get through the winter. It was actually the first winter that I haven't experienced seasonal depression in 41 years of living in this country. So I do use UV lamp in the winter months to support vitamin D synthesis. There's a lot of
Mhm.
controversy around using those lamps, especially at high latitudes, because of the circadian dysregulation that you could potentially cause. But I found it so enormously beneficial that I'm a big fan of them. And EMR Tech has a light panel now that's called the Krypton, that actually has UVA and UVB built in to the red and near infrared light panel. So you get comprehensive red light therapy, photobiomodulation combined with UVA and UVB.
If someone already has a red and near infrared light panel like myself, and I know many people who do, but they want to get a sun lamp for the winter, what's the one that you recommend? Is it Spurdy or another one?
So I have the Spurdy. I have the Spurdy vitamin D lamp and also the Fuji tanning lamp from that company. I personally like the idea of the EMR tech one a lot better, just because you have the red and the infrared light combined with the UVA and UVB. I feel a little bit nervous to recommend just isolated UVA and B to individuals without pairing that with red and near infrared light. So that's
Right.
my top recommendation now. It's not that I don't like the Spready D lamp. I just think that if you're going to use it, you want to make sure that you are pairing that lamp with a red and infrared lamp or panel as well, so that you're getting all of those really powerful wavelengths of light that are supporting the mitochondria and those really anti-inflammatory wavelengths of light that are penetrating a lot deeper into the tissue.
Right, absolutely. And in terms of optimizing the mitochondria, so like I'm breathing molecular hydrogen. Obviously, circadian biology is important, nutrition, and the phospholipids are important. What are some other ways that you really like to optimize the mitochondria?
There are so many ways that we can optimize mitochondrial function. And the tricky thing is I think that we need to be incorporating all of those things. Again, just going back to Dr. Bruce Hoffman's work, this is where he really shines, because it's not just, you talked earlier about how we have a tendency in this field to really focus on heavy metals or mycotoxins or parasites. We really try, we look at one thing and then try to treat that one thing. And I'm sure that most people that have been on the receiving end of those approaches have found that that doesn't work. We can get a
Right.
little bit of short-term relief from some of our symptoms when we apply these band-aids, but long-term healing really requires lots and lots of inputs that are required to
Okay.
restore mitochondrial functioning. So when it comes to keep it simple for all the listeners, the phospholipids and fatty acids are, I would go so far to say they're non-negotiable. We really want to make sure that we're giving our body the nutrients that they need to restore and maintain healthy cells and healthy mitochondrial membranes. And phosphatidylcholine specifically is extremely susceptible to oxidation. And so the poorer our redox is, the more susceptible we are to membrane damage. And then it's just this vicious cycle. So we want to make sure that we're actually providing our bodies with the things that it needs to maintain healthy membranes. And that's included on a mitochondrial level. These phospholipids also act like antioxidants. So there's many, many benefits to phospholipids outside, specifically phosphatidylcholine, actually, outside of just the structure and function role that they play. And then we want to make sure that we are optimizing circadian biology. And within that, you talked about nutrition. Food is light information. And so we want to be optimizing local and seasonal food and really aligning with that seasonal dietary approach to optimize mitochondrial function. And that's for many reasons. I don't want to even get into all of the reasons because it'll take me the rest of the episode. But along those lines, we also want to make sure that we're optimizing leptin. Leptin is also a circadian hormone. And so the proper timing of our meals combined with local and seasonal foods is going to help to signal to the mitochondria to shift metabolically between a summer and a winter metabolism, which is absolutely imperative for mitochondrial longevity. So most people are going to be stuck in a summer metabolism. They're eating fruit all year round. They're eating carbohydrates all year round. They're eating food from all over the world. Many people are not sticking to local and seasonal food choices. And that's really detrimental to mitochondrial function because those mitochondria are not getting the signals that they need to shift into AMPK metabolism would be perfect. That winter, or a perfect example, that winter metabolism, that's where we get more autophagy. That's where we're using our own body fat for fuel. We're lowering our body mass. So it's interesting to see this trend currently where we have all of these people that gain weight in the winter and they lose weight in the summer. And from an ancestral standpoint, that's actually the opposite of what we should see. We should be gaining weight in the summer and the fall to prepare for winter. And we should be reducing body weight over the course of the winter because we're getting into that AMPK pathway. And there's many things that we need to do to get into that pathway. We want to make sure that we're eating within a tight window, so only when the sun is up. So when we have shorter days, we're probably eating fewer calories because we're not eating as many meals. We have a longer fasting period. We have longer periods of darkness. And so we want to be adhering to all of those dietary principles. And then, of course, all of the things that everyone else talks about. We want to be reducing toxic load. We want to be working on stress management. We want to be grounding, connecting our body to the earth on a regular basis. We want to be mitigating non-native EMFs. So that means hardwiring your computer, keeping your phone on airplane mode. I think it's a necessity today that everybody gets a building biologist into their home to do an assessment of their home, just to make sure that their home is safe. That's really the only environment that we can control anymore, because as soon as we walk out the door, we're bombarded with these non-native EMFs. And so there's a lot to it. Family constellations, somatic experience therapy. We can do amygdala retraining, DNRS, Gupta program, primal trust are all options for people. There's a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And talk about lipid rafts. What are lipid rafts and why are they important?
So like you're talking about ceramides, inflammatory lipid rafts that get created when we have the breakdown of.
Yeah, so like in Patricia's book, she calls them lipid rafts when they get damaged, from mycotoxins or Lyme bacteria or any stealth pathogen. And she also talks about how the people will get better, but only if you keep insulin low.
Yeah, yeah. So, and that's because, so the lipid rafts, just to go back to, lipid rafts are found in the body. So it's only when we get an accumulation of them that they become problematic. And they're formed through the breakdown of phosphatidylcholine and ceramides. And then we get this accumulation. So sphingomyelin is a combination of phosphatidylcholine and ceramides. Sphingomyelin is also a lipid that's found within the cell membranes. We want it in lower concentrations to phosphatidylcholine. So phosphatidylcholine is the main phospholipid that's found within the outer cell membrane of every one of our cells. It makes up roughly between 50 and about 90% of the outer cell membrane. And that just depends, Tim, on the cell type. So our liver cell membranes are about 70% phosphatidylcholine. The epithelial cells in the gut mucosa are about 90% phosphatidylcholine. Then we have immune cells that are about 50% phosphatidylcholine. So we have about 200 different cell types, and depending on the cell type is going to determine the concentration of phosphatidylcholine that's found. So when we have a breakdown of sphingomyelin, and then that's when we end up getting an accumulation of these ceramides. And accumulation of those ceramides, or those lipid rafts, are associated with neurological conditions. So we see Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS, Lewy body dementia, MS are all correlated with an accumulation of those lipid rafts. So we can use phosphatidylcholine to help to support the body's phosphatidylcholine levels. And just by providing the body with phosphatidylcholine, we see a lowering of the breakdown of those sphingomyelins and the creation of those lipid rafts. And then we can use other tools to help to support removing those lipid rafts as well. And you had mentioned, the other thing that you mentioned was, after that, the lipid rafts.
Insulin, if you keep insulin low.
Thank you. So phospholipase A2. So the reason why, when we're focused on supporting our cells, we really want to make sure that we are maintaining blood glucose, even keel blood glucose levels throughout the course of the day. So we don't want to see these peaks and valleys in blood sugar. And when we see these peaks and valleys in blood sugar, we know that every time there's a peak, we're activating the enzyme phospholipase A2. And phospholipase A2 is an enzyme that quite literally acts as lipid scissors. So it clips the fatty acid tail off of the phosphatidylcholine molecule, creating lysophosphatidylcholine, and damages the membrane. So it wouldn't be a good idea to be eating a high carbohydrate diet while supplementing with phospholipids and fatty acids. Not only is that going to shut down fatty acid oxidation through that high carbohydrate load, but it's also going to activate that enzyme that's actively damaging the cell membrane. So yeah, blood sugar regulation is key to this whole picture in maintaining, restoring, and maintaining cellular health.
Awesome. So while we're on the topic of mitochondria, let's talk about deuterium. What is deuterium for the listeners and viewers, and why is it important? How do we mitigate it?
So deuterium is an isotope of hydrogen. So I don't know how familiar your audience is with hydrogen. So hydrogen is two hydrogen atoms covalently bonded. They share two electrons. And hydrogen is, if you think about oxidative phosphorylation, we have hydrogen that gets pumped into the intermembrane space, whether that's by the electrons or the hydrogen jumping, like Nick Lane says. I think that's still yet to be determined. But we have the hydrogen atoms that get pumped into the intermembrane space, and then we have the electrons that go through those protein complexes so that we can make water on complex 4, and we can make ATP on ATPase or complex 5. So deuterium being an isotope of hydrogen, it's double the weight of hydrogen. So if you think about it, say a basketball is a good analogy. So if hydrogen was a basketball, deuterium would be 2 basketballs glued together. And so the hydrogen needs to come down through the ATPase in order to make ATP. And if we have deuterium in the inner mitochondria membrane, we are going to end up breaking that ATPase as the deuterium comes down instead of hydrogen. Also, just considering the weight, it's going to be more prone to come down to complex 5 or ATPase because it's just a lot heavier. So deuterium damages ATPase or blows up that complex 5 and inhibits the mitochondria's ability to make ATP. And so it's very damaging. So deuterium should be kept in the bloodstream. It's not that we don't need deuterium, we do. We just don't want an accumulation of it, and we don't want it getting into the mitochondria. And the mitochondria actually have a couple of different screening processes to ensure that deuterium doesn't get into the mitochondria through glycolysis and also through the Krebs cycle. But again, if we have an accumulation of deuterium, if we're not depleting deuterium through, there's many different mechanisms in which we can do that. Or if we're consuming a really high carbohydrate diet, those carbohydrate-rich foods are very, very rich in deuterium, then that can cause this accumulation in deuterium levels and end up really damaging the mitochondria. And I'm sure you've looked at the research. Dr. Gabor Smalley is one of the researchers who studies deuterium and cancer. And there's many, many other researchers. Dr. Stephanie Seneff and Dr. Laszlo Boris are 2 of the most prominent researchers that are studying high levels of deuterium and the impact that it has on human health. So if people think about deuterium is everywhere, it's in our water. It's going to be found in really high carbohydrate-rich foods. Foods that have a long growing season are going to be higher in deuterium than, say, like leafy greens, kale, lettuce, those types of kind of above ground vegetables. Some lower carbohydrate foods can also be high in deuterium because of the water content. So again, cucumbers can be high in deuterium just because they have a lot of water. And depending on where people live, it's going to determine the level of deuterium in their water. So if you're at the equator, you're going to have a lot higher levels of deuterium in your water, up to about 155 parts per million, than you would if you were living at a really high altitude in the mountains. Some of that mountain water is more like 140 or 145 parts per million.
Sure.
So we can deplete deuterium through spending a lot of time in the sun. The UV light is going to help with deuterium depletion. Sweating is an excellent way to deplete deuterium. So sauna therapy is really helpful to deplete deuterium. Exercise, of course, is going to be helpful in depleting that deuterium as well. So there's lots of ways that we can help to dump that deuterium, and then leaning into a diet that's rich in fatty acids, really high fat diet. So if you think about a ketogenic diet, that's going to be a much lower deuterium diet than, say, a vegetarian or a vegan diet. Those would be really, really high deuterium.
Right. Yeah, so I think the ketogenic diet can be very, very successful. I've seen it be very, very successful in treating, acute conditions and even up to maybe a year. The only thing I would say is when you look at the saccharolytic fermentation versus proteolytic fermentation pathways in the gut, I mean, they both produce some degree of short chain fatty acids, but proteolytic fermentation produces some negative byproducts that are damaging to the gut and the body. And so we need that saccharolytic fermentation to produce butyrate, acetate, and propionate. That's the only thing I would add.
Also, Tim, just speaking about the metabolic shifts that we need. And so I don't, unless you're using the ketogenic diet as a therapeutic diet. So I have a nephew that's a perfect example. He was diagnosed with a rare form of epilepsy when he was 2, and he's been following a ketogenic diet combined with the phospholipids and the fatty acids from
Mhm.
body bio to support his condition. And he's been seizure free for a year and a half now by following the ketogenic diet. So there's a therapeutic application for that diet that we want to make sure that we consider. And then there's the diets for everyday people that just want to optimize their mitochondrial health. That's when
Right,
we want to make sure that you're just what you're talking about, that we're not only following a ketogenic diet all year long, because a
right,
ketogenic diet is what? It's a winter diet. It's a
right.
winter metabolism. It's
Yeah,
activating AMPK pathways. So ideally, we want to be shifting through mTOR in the summer and AMPK. So in the summertime, we'd be eating a lot more fiber, a lot
right,
more carbohydrates. But we're also pairing that with a higher solar yield. So we're getting much more sun exposure. So we're supporting
right,
our body's ability to dump that deuterium. We're sweating more.
right.
So the more and more that we can get connected to nature, the more and more that we can live closely with the natural world, the better off we are with our health. And we see this when it comes to diets too. And there's all kinds of dietary dogma out there. Ketogenic
Yeah,
diet is better. Carnivore diet is the diet you want to follow, or vegan or vegetarian, whatever it is. And when you understand mitochondrial medicine, you see, how off base all of this information is, because it's
yeah,
really about the diet that's best for you is dependent on where you are located and the season that you're in. And we want to
right.
make sure we're leaning into whole real foods that either grow on the earth or are raised on the earth, and we're eating local and seasonally. And then we're naturally
Yeah.
going to have those shifts.
Yeah, I mean, I think context is important, this biological duality, carbs can be bad in certain situations, fats can be bad in certain situations. Some of it depends on, like you said, on your geographic location. Some of it depends on your age. So the endothelium gets damaged, as we age chronologically. And so higher fat diets, can do more damage to the arterial lining and the endothelial glycocalyx. There's a great book. I interviewed the author called The Immunity Code, Joe Green, real Joe Green. Yeah, so his stuff is really good, and he's extremely thorough, and he talks about mitochondrial health and cyclic fermentation and peroxisomes. And if you haven't read it, I think it would be something you would be right up your alley, basically.
Yeah, I have read his book actually. Yeah,
Oh, you have
I'm
it? Okay, awesome.
yeah.
So, let me see. In terms of resistance training, how should we alter our activity levels, our movement schedules based on the seasons, or should we do that at all? Should that be a consideration?
So I'm not an exercise expert, but I will say, Tim, just to speak about the glycocalyx, the main component of the glycocalyx is phosphatidylcholine. So
Mhm.
just yeah, for any of your listeners that are looking for support for that, we can really lean into the phospholipids to support cardiovascular health as well. So in terms of exercise, we know that through applying mechanical stress on our bone, we are going to generate electrons through piezoelectricity. So I am a huge proponent of moving our body and lifting heavy things and just moving in a way that we were designed to move. And so I'm not a big fan of going to the gym and doing, typical treadmill workouts and kind of these more stationary movements where we're not engaging our mind and more parts of our body through movement. So I just wanted to say that, and I'm also not an exercise expert. What
Sure.
is really important when it comes to movement or exercise is that we are also supporting circadian biology by exercising at the right time of the day. So an example that would be really disruptive to the circadian system would be going to the gym at 5 o'clock in the morning. It's dark outside and you're going right from the car to blue lights. And now you've just completely discombobulated your circadian clock. You've told your brain that it's about noon when it's 5 or 5:30 in the morning. And then this is also really disruptive to the cortisol and melatonin cycle, because we want to make sure that we get that healthy peak of cortisol in the morning when we sync our naked eyes with the sun that blue light from the sun is going to help to support that healthy peak in cortisol, and then we'll have that gradual lowering of cortisol through the course of the day. And then that pairs nicely with, as the cortisol lowers, we get that nice rise in melatonin when we're exposed to complete and total darkness. So that's very disruptive to our circadian rhythm to exercise first thing in the morning, to raise cortisol even higher, and to not get that appropriate light signal that we need. And instead, we're getting this toxic blue light signal. After that, as long as we're not engaging in that behavior, I think as long as you're watching the sunrise and you're eating a nice big protein-rich breakfast, then I would say you can probably engage in exercise anytime after that. Of course, up until, we don't want to be exercising late until the evening. And I always encourage people to take their movement outside so that you are pairing that with the beautiful sun exposure that we need for our mitochondria to thrive.
Awesome. And in terms of the Bredesen protocol, because I saw that you are certified in Dale Bredesen's protocol, talk to us about how that influences your approach to working with clients in terms of nutrition and resolving symptoms.
Yeah, so I worked with Dr. Dale Bredesen's patients for about 2 years under one of the doctors that was supporting him in running his program. And so he puts every patient on a mild ketogenic diet, regardless of the season and regardless of any other of the health conditions. So I have kind of moved away from just using the ketogenic diet as the sole therapy. I've really, as I have gained more knowledge in the world of mitochondrial medicine and followed Dr. Doug Wallace's work and Dr. Nick Lane's work, I really believe that these neurological conditions are mitochondrial diseases. And so the goal is to make sure that we optimize mitochondrial function. Not that I don't think that the ketogenic diet can be used as a therapeutic tool, and some people respond really well to it. I just would no longer recommend that as a therapy that I would use across the board with every individual.
Right.
I just explained the shifts that the mitochondria need metabolically from summer to winter. And so I think adhering to that is a huge support to the mitochondria to help to support health and longevity. And so I do subscribe to a ketogenic diet or a mild ketogenic diet in the winter months if you're living somewhere like I am in Alberta, where the ground is frozen and nothing grows and we don't have a strong solar yield, so we wouldn't be capable of growing any produce during the winter months. Then we want to lean into fatty animal foods and be sinking more into that ketogenic diet. And then in the summer, I am a big proponent of consuming the vegetables that are grown locally and the berries that are very short season here, to be consuming those. So if I was working with someone that had cognitive decline, again, the shifts that I've made since working with Dr. Dale Bredesen's team would be more towards doing all of the things that we need to optimize mitochondrial functioning, and then working specifically with the individual. So if staying in that mild state of ketosis is supporting their cognition, then we can still do that in the summer months, while also including some of these lower carbohydrate, local and seasonal vegetables as well. But I don't agree with using that as a therapeutic tool for every single individual across the board.
Right. Absolutely. I think one thing that goes overlooked is stealth pathogens. If you look at like Dietrich Klinghardt, he says he's never had someone with MS, ALS, Alzheimer's, any neurodegenerative condition that didn't have HHV6, Lyme, Bartonella, Babesia, etc. And so the microbial mitochondriopathies, right? The inflammatory cytokines basically are using the mitochondria as a punching bag, essentially. And so there's a immune system component, pathogenic component, I think, to these issues as well. What's something that you know today that you wish you would have known, say, 8 to 10 years ago?
I'll also just add to what you just said, Tim, as well. I still believe that all those infections are mitochondrial diseases. Those mitochondrial disruption is what is going to allow for those pathogens to take over, right? So
Yeah.
I still think that all roads lead back to the mitochondria and the water that's in the cell. Even when you look at that through an oxygen lens, when we have a low oxygen environment in the cell, that's going to be a perfect environment for pathogens. When we have lots of oxygen in the environment, and that would be, that would be when we have this beautiful structured exclusion zone water, that pathogens are going to be really unlikely to be able to exclusion zone, right? That water
Yeah.
excludes it. It's larger than an electron. Really unlikely to take over the cell. So I still think that all roads lead back to the mitochondria. What I wish that I knew 10 years ago, did you say, before?
Yeah, 8 to 10 years ago, roughly.
I don't even know if I can say that I wish I knew anything before I learned it, because I really feel like this has been such a beautiful evolution of knowledge for me that I have been able to accumulate and compound and get to the level that I'm at today. And I think if I would have learned this information 8 to 10 years ago, it wouldn't have synthesized the same way that it did, within the last couple of years, that I really fell back into the whole quantum biology world and Jack Kruse's work, and then really studying, the water in the cell, Jerry Pollack's work, Dr. Carly Newday's work, Victor Schallenberger, all of these researchers, that Dr. Robert O. Becker's work. There's been so many people that I have had such a great opportunity to learn from, and learning that new information and combining that information with past knowledge that I had has been really incredible. So I don't wish that I knew anything before I actually learned it. And actually really interesting, just understanding the exclusion zone water. Speaking of Dr. Patricia Kane's work, and learning about the membrane potential and the importance of the electrical charge of the membrane, and now understanding the properties of the exclusion zone water, like that has really clicked for me now, understanding like the exclusion zone water in the cell generating this beautiful charge, and that interaction that it plays with the hydrophilic head of the phosphatidylcholine molecule, that's now generating that charge in the membrane. And so it's not just about, like, yes, we want to make sure that we're supporting with phospholipids and essential fatty acids, and then doing all the things that are going to help to build this beautiful exclusion zone water in the cell so we can maintain that electrical charge. And that's where I love red light therapy. I love sauna therapy. I love baths. I love cold therapy. All these things that we get to do that are free for the most part, that are going to help to support the expansion of that exclusion zone water, and also support the mitochondria's ability to make water.
Yeah. So we're going to put your links up, but where can people find you if they're interested?
So my website is justinestenger.com. BodyBio's website is bodybio.com. My Instagram handle is at Justine Cellular Nutrition. I teach a mitochondrial restoration course. That second cohort is going to be in February. And I've got lots of information on my website, little mini courses on nutrition if people are interested in what I talked about, summer and winter metabolism, and really how to optimize cellular health through using food as information.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for the work that you're doing. Thank you for your time. And hopefully we can have you back on in the future at some point.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Tim. This was really fun.
All right. I'm Dr. Tim Jackson. Everyone have a blessed day. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.